Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to Ore-atory. This month we have my friend and expert extraordinaire, Laura Fletcher. So I am really, really excited for what we have for you guys today. Welcome, Laura. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Lindsey. Thanks for having me.
I sort of want to kick this off with a big question.
Okay.
What sparked your passion for helping candidates sort of redesign and work on their resumes?
Sure. I have a background in resumes through my marketing experience, but what really makes me passionate about helping people with their resumes is helping. It started as helping friends get out of toxic job situations. I think we've all, hopefully not everyone, but most everyone's been in a job situation that they really didn't like and wanted to get out of. And so it started with helping friends rewrite their resumes to get out of bad job situations and into a job that they love. And that's what really drives me to want to help people create a fabulous resume.
I love that. And I found myself in the same situation often, but I think you come from sort of a unique background to do this. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned my marketing background, and that's kind of how it played into this. So, in the field of marketing that I do, which is AEC marketing, architectural, engineering, and construction, what happens is that, like if I'm working for an engineering firm, we get a request for a proposal from a client, and we have to put together a compelling proposal, which includes the key team members, who the project manager is going to be, who the technical discipline leads are going to be. And we have to, create this proposal that convinces the client that we know what we're doing. So as part of that package, I have to tell who the team is, and I have to also include professional resumes. So if the project was, like, for example, like a tailings dam design in an Arctic climate, that's pretty specific. So I have to find, the Arctic tailings projects in my project manager's resume and pull those forward. And so for over a dozen years now, I have been tailoring and customizing professional resumes for that purpose, to win work for clients. And that dovetailed right into helping friends with their personal resume.
It is a superpower, and I think resumes sort of give candidates the self-esteem and the momentum to pursue all kinds of interesting things. So, there are a few things that I want to dive into a little bit more specifically, and let's talk a bit about sort of the difference between a resume and a CV, and perhaps a personal marketing resume. Give me sort of the definitions and what those really look like.
Sure. And it's kind of regionally dependent, kind of where you are. I know that Canada loves using CVs, and the US is more resume focused. And so there's a couple of differences between those documents that you just mentioned. So a resume is usually like a 2 max 3 page document that has your professional career history in it, as well as some sort of executive summary that talks about what you've done in the past and what you want to do going forward. Okay. And I personally think that all resumes should have a branding title as well. So that's a resume. And then a CV stands for curriculum vitae. And it's more or less like a transcript of everything you've done in your career. And so those can get pretty lengthy. Sure. And it's got less soft skills, and it's got less kind of personal marketing language in it. It looks almost like a college transcript, right?
Sure.
And then you also mentioned personal marketing documents. And so those can be like a branding document. Some people like to put together a portfolio of their projects. Some people like to have some sort of branding document that's pretty and has graphics and maybe speaks more to like their personal values and their mantra, if you will. And there's a time and a place for each of those things. But what I focus on are resumes.
Yeah. No, and I think it's interesting because there are so many different versions, and I get the lovely privilege of seeing all of them, I think, at any given time. I have sort of gone into relying, I think, pretty heavily on you and your services for this, actually. But I have another sort of thought. How long do hiring managers spend to review resumes?
It's a surprisingly short amount of time. It's only 6 seconds. And that's why I'm personally a huge fan of a branding title. You've got your name at the top, you've got your branding title. Everything else is just to support that, basically. But you've got 6 seconds of their attention to really convey that you're qualified for this job. Unnerving, huh?
It's a frightening statistic. As much time as I spend reviewing resumes, 6 seconds is literally nothing. So it has to have all of the right components in it, which is crazy. I think a fun fact that I will sort of put out there is the resume comes for the French word of summary. And so, as you were saying, it sort of, instead of being a transcript, it really is summarizing a lot of what's going on. I think, to the audience, a question that I'm going to put out there is, what is your favorite resume tip that you may have received? Put it in the chat. We're going to keep streaming along. I would encourage, Laura and I are happy to stick around after we finish our conversation and chat with you guys a little bit. But tell us your fun facts. We'll look forward to reading some of these as we move along. So that all being said, we'll go into tips.
Okay.
Let's talk about formatting. What are some of your favorite tips, and how can candidates sort of optimize their resumes for ATS systems?
Yeah, that's a big one. So I always recommend that you draft a resume in a standard program like Microsoft Word and then convert it to PDF when you're submitting. But that helps it to be read correctly by what you just mentioned, the ATS, which stands for Applicant Tracking System. I know that you've had some issues with your own applicant tracking system and not being able to read really like graphic forward resumes or something that was created in Canva, right? Like we all love to use Canva now. And so just starting from scratch, number one, create it in Microsoft Word. And I've already mentioned a couple components. I think I mentioned a branding title at the very top, right under your name. And so that's a piece of the formatting that I haven't seen done a lot, to be honest with you. And I think is probably the most, one of the most, if not the most important part of a resume, because like I mentioned, you've got that at the top and then everything else is just there to support that, right? Like that's how you're holding yourself out to a potential hiring manager. So I am a fill in the blank, and then everything else supports that. So, and then I also mentioned that I like to have an executive summary at the very top. That's really the part of your resume that you get to tell your story, right? You get to tell your future boss the parts of your job that you've done so far that you actually enjoyed and that you want to keep doing. For example, if you are a technical person and you've been a mining engineer, and your resume is all about your technical capabilities, but actually you love mentoring junior staff, or you like to coach teams, whatever it is, like if you're more of a people person, how would they know that if all you've talked about is your engineering capabilities? So the executive summary at the very top is your opportunity to really talk about what you have loved, about what you've done before, and what you want to do going forward. Yes.
I think that this area is one that I think is a little controversial. I have read so many things where leave out an executive summary, leave out the objective statement, etc. And I absolutely disagree. And I'm totally on Team Laura for resume design here, because I think that it absolutely shapes everything else that is to come, right? It gives you that opportunity. And perhaps, I would take even further liberty and say, people should be authentically themselves, right? Like, show who you are, say what you love. Like, this will resonate, I think, throughout the rest of the resume, where they're getting the facts and all the rest of the stuff. But that leads me to sort of like the next area. And I actually have maybe 2 or 3 follow-up questions for this. So what's sort of an ideal length of resume from your perspective?
Yeah, 2, max 3 pages. No one wants to read your 10-page resume.
Not me.
Literally the word, it comes from the term for summary, right? It should be a summary. Keep it to 2 pages.
Yep. And then another area that I know you work really hard on with candidates is sort of injecting metrics. Let's talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. So metrics is one of those things where it can feel like metrics kind of reduce a person to their numbers. And that doesn't feel great all the time, but it is really important to get those metrics on your resume for multiple reasons. ATS systems really like metrics, and they will score according to how many metrics you have woven into your resume. But also what metrics do is it breaks up your resume. It breaks up the monotony of just a really word heavy resume. So if you can say, instead of like, I led a team, if you can say, I managed a team of 10 engineers, that's a metric, right? And so it doesn't need to be showy or, like I won X amount of dollars. I mean, that's all great, but like it can be just smaller metrics like that. It just breaks it up for the reader, and it makes a nice break for their eyes.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And we work in a very heavy industry with people who love numbers. And so I think that it also hits well with the audience, right? So if somebody is looking at your resume for 6 seconds and they see that you're a business developer and you brought in X number of business, or if you're in a commercial field and you're, hitting certain metrics and sales, that's an awesome thing to put in there, right? And like you said, it sort of injects that break for the reader's eyes and just leads them to the answer that they want to see a little bit. So I think that's a really great tip. We had a few things. I can't, for some reason, respond to comments. This is my first time doing the comments and running this, so forgive me here. But one of the things that somebody asked here, I had asked for people to put in like their tips and suggestions. What are your favorite tips and suggestions for resumes? So what I really mean by that is like, what's a tip somebody gave you that like changed your perspective on resumes? How are you developing your resume any differently because somebody gave you great advice? So that's for Irina. And then we've gotten a few other amazing comments. So I will sort of address those maybe a little bit more at the end since I can't comment. One other person, Patty asked, at least on our team, she asked, how far back should somebody go listing their past roles?
Yeah, that's a great question for those in their mid to later careers. And my answer to that is, if you've got 2 pages, right? And so you want your most relevant experience in there. If you have 20 years of relevant experience, and that's way more than 2 pages, then your challenge is going to be editing and cutting it down to summarize your experience. And if you've had a lot of roles, like if you've jumped, from role to role to role, sometimes you can bunch those together. Sometimes you can use an other relevant experience section to just list those roles, right? And not go into a bunch of detail about them. Company, title, years that you were there. I see this a lot with geology resumes actually, because they go, they're exploring, right? And so a lot of exploration geologists have many different roles. And so I've worked really hard to edit those down to relevant experience, and then using the other section to kind of just say, and here's the rest of my professional experience. And I'm not going to go into big detail about that, but it's all the same. So,
yeah. Well, I find, and something that you and I have talked about, and I think that I might sort of prompt you to go into a little bit before we kind of wrap this area up. I find that there are a few areas where people get a little bit nervous. And some of those are when they have, transitions or gaps, or when they've been at it for a long time. And so just to kind of keep comments and questions going in the audience, what sort of is the most unusual thing you guys have seen in a resume? Share that with us in the comments. Laura, I kind of want to hop to a quick question for you, which is sort of what is a pet peeve that you have on resumes? And then we'll hop to my next big category that I want to talk about.
Yeah, I think I already mentioned it. Just an overly lengthy resume. No one wants to read a 10-page resume. Nobody got time for that.
Nobody's got time for that. I will enthusiastically say I agree with you. And my pet peeve, as you know, is when people copy the job description and plug it in as bullet points underneath whatever it is, or when they like have redundancies, when they have, they were a geologist and a geologist too, and like a senior geologist, and they just add like 3 more bullet points to whatever the job description said, and there's zero any good stuff in there. So that's mine. But hopping from that, letting the audience sort of comment on what are unusual things, or perhaps what are your pet peeves as well. You can say that too. I kind of want to talk a bit more about, one, how to showcase what you love to do, and then launch into some of the other things that I'm sort of baiting you about.
So how to showcase what you love to do?
What you love to do.
Yeah, so that's what I use the executive summary for.
Okay.
That's where I go into, and usually I have to have a conversation with a candidate. When I'm working on someone's resume, there's usually a discovery call involved, and I ask them to go inward and really think about the parts of the jobs that they've had that they really like, and what they didn't like, and what they can ditch off their resume at this point. But the things that really make them tick, and I play those up in the executive summary.
Yeah. Well, that leads right into sort of how can we give permission to candidates to leave certain things off their resume and job history so that we can get it to 2 to 3 pages? I think that's really important, right? Because some people are like, oh no, I did all this stuff, and they're really stuck on it. So
yeah,
think about how you manage that, and how candidates can think about how to leave things off, perhaps.
Yeah, I would think about it in terms of relevance to the role that you're pursuing. And so, if in your job history you've got, maybe you wore multiple hats at a company. Maybe you've been at a small company and you're business development and marketing and X, Y, and Z, but that you're really focusing on your business development at this point. You have permission to leave off the things that are not relevant anymore. Just because you did them doesn't mean that they have to be there. That's kind of, again, goes back to the difference between a CV and a resume.
Sure.
On a resume, you have full permission to drop things that are no longer relevant, or that you don't enjoy doing and wouldn't want to carry forward, and that are not relevant to the kind of role that you're pursuing at this point.
Yeah. I think that that's a really good tip. And one thing that I sort of encourage people to do is keep a spreadsheet or a Word document. And like, as you do new cool things or have new cool experiences, or if you take something off of your resume that you're like, well, maybe I want to remember I did that, because we're innately sort of not the best at remembering all of these things. And then you go into an interview and you're like, oh gosh, I forgot all of the things I've done for the last 20 years. You have this document that you can rely on and say, oh yeah, I did do all of this stuff. And so I always say, you don't have to ditch it entirely. Just keep it in like your own private bank that you can go back to. So another area that I want to talk about is sort of like how someone can really leverage their passions to shape what their resume presents. So I think for me, this is giving them permission to really be authentically themselves and not just be very sterile necessarily in a resume. But what do you have to say there?
Yeah, I think that goes back to, whether you're working with a consultant to help you retool your resume, or if you're just doing it on your own, just go inward and really think about what you've done to this point, and what you're passionate about, and what you want to do going forward, and get clear on what those are, and then articulate those. So sometimes that comes out in a conversation, but you can come up with it yourself just by going inward and sitting with it and asking yourself those questions.
Yeah. Well, I use often the big four. And so we wrote a blog about that last month. So I'll just point people to our insights page about the big four. And that's sort of a deep dive inside to figure out what those might look like and how you can shape things. But, sort of moving forward, give me some insight as to quick tips for weaving some personal marketing into a resume.
Okay. We talked about a branding title, and actually I saw that there was a question in the comments about an example of a branding title versus a general title. And so thanks for that question. And what I'll say here is, for example, if you are a marketer and maybe you've had the title marketing manager to this point, but the roles that you're looking for are higher level, then like director or chief marketing officer. If you're aiming for something higher than that, then don't brand yourself as marketing manager,
right,
and give the impression that that's the level that you're at and that's the level that you want to stay at, right? So you could open that up to be more broad and say, I am a marketing professional. Or if you want to be bold and you know that you're ready for the next step and you know that the role that you're applying for is a director position, then brand yourself as a director of marketing. Your branding title doesn't have to match your last job title. So keep that in mind. Another thing that I like to do with my clients when we're coming up with their branding title is it doesn't have to be one thing. You can be multiple things, and most people are multifaceted, right? And so if you are a engineer, but you also love leading teams and you want to be part of the organizational management of a company, then you can be those two things. You can say, I am a mining engineer and an organizational leader.
Yep.
And you have full permission to be two things, right?
Yeah.
And three things if you want it to be. I usually limit it to two max, but three's okay sometimes. And so that's kind of my limit. So I hope that answers your question. I think it's Sade. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So yeah, that's branding titles.
Yeah, and somebody else had mentioned, so Chadwick had mentioned, what are your thoughts on maintaining a personal website that has one's full CV? I love it. I know Laura loves it. We have a friend that has awesome little excerpts and links on her resume that you can get to certain things. And so, Chadwick, I think it's a fabulous idea. I also think LinkedIn is quite good for this. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So our friend Peggy Bell actually has a really great example of how to do this. And it's not a personal website. It's a Google Drive, a private Google Drive that she includes a link to from her resume or CV. And on her private Google Drive, she keeps, a folder of all of her speaking engagements and a folder of some examples of like marketing documents that she's created. She has all of these different things. And then, you can keep your certifications all there instead of trying to have all of your certifications on your resume taking up space, right? So yeah, Chadwick, we love the idea of having some sort of online place that you can put all of that stuff and link to it from your resume. And that way, if people want to go and discover more about you, that's at their disposal.
We had another question that leads us into a question I was going to ask you anyway. How can we address resume gaps?
Yeah. My suggestion for addressing resume gaps is to address the elephant in the room. Just address it head on. And it doesn't necessarily need to be in the resume itself. Maybe it's in the cover letter or in the body of an email that you're sending to a hiring manager. I might say something like, you might notice that there was a gap from 2021 to 2024, and I was caregiving for a family member or whatever it was, or I was on sabbatical or whatever it is. Yeah. I don't suggest just leaving the reader to guess what happened during that time. That might lead them to think that, I don't know, it's something that it wasn't. And then they've got this negative connotation in their mind. And then if they have to ask you, it's kind of an awkward question. So my suggestion is just address it head on and tell the reader what it was.
Yep. I am absolutely in concert with that because it's a question I have to ask all the time, right? It's sort of like, well, what happened in these 2 years or whatever. And I can make up stuff, but that's of no value to anyone. And so while it does sometimes inspire conversation, it's not the way I'd like to use our time necessarily.
Right.
And like you said, it could color whomever might be reading it to say, well, what really did happen there?
Yeah.
Like, did they have a job that they didn't want to tell anybody about, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
So I think that head-on strategy is really good. And I would echo that starting your resume at the start of your experience also keeps me from saying, like, you started at a manager title, but I'm sure you had previous experience to that. Like, what did that really look like? And so it just gives us that full color, because those are two questions I hate to ask. Like, what did you do before that you're leaving off, and what happened in these 2 years? Like,
yeah.
So those are some things. And I guess sort of at this stage, what I want to say is, make sure that you follow our guest, Laura. Here are some of the ways that you can do that. And certainly, I would love if you guys could follow us. You are here, so you kind of already know how to do that. So MRC Recruiting is our website. I will pop that up as well. And one of the areas that I want to talk about next is my actual favorite part. Laura, talk to me about sort of what you're doing and how you're positively influencing our lovely mining industry through your work.
Yeah, I am passionate about mentoring women in our industry and trying to help promote women in our industry as well. More diversity.
I love that, and I work to do the same thing. And I think that, having the conversation about being inclusive and open and figuring out how to talk about our experiences and resumes is all part of that. So thank you so much. I think to kind of wrap things up, because we are hitting our 30-minute mark. So I appreciate everybody kind of hanging out with us. And there are a few questions that we're absolutely happy to stick around and talk about after this. But just sort of to conclude a little bit of what we're talking about. One, Laura, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your lovely insights and your time. I think to kind of sum it up, what are the major takeaways that you'd like people to have today?
Yeah, if there's one thing that I want the audience to take away from our conversation is using your resume to be more focused on what you want to do rather than a backward looking what you've done before, right? So figure out what that is, go inward, and retool that resume to be forward looking.
Yeah. Well, and I don't always have all the time to do that, but take a peek at our 4 questions. Call Laura. I think sometimes having conversations out loud about what you love and what get you excited and what you're passionate about are the best ways of going back through your resume so that you can shape it into what you actually want to do next. So use the people that are around you that you know and love and trust that can help you with this stuff. And we're here as well. So stick around. We'll answer some more questions. Please join us next month. We will have our next live August 15th with Jason Fearnow, where he and I have the pleasure of talking about the importance of developing your workforce. And so, yeah, Laura, thank you. We will sort of turn off some of the live. We can keep the live on and answer a few questions. I think we've got some from Maria, Chadwick, and Sam. I will kind of launch into that if you guys are cool with that. So Maria had asked, sometimes your title and corporation does not encapsulate well what you can do for your capability or your capabilities. Sorry, things are moving. You might be qualified to do a certain job that you love, but haven't had the chance to do it in a work setup. How can we showcase this? I think that's a really important question.
Yeah. This is where you have a little bit of artistic freedom in the executive summary to say what you love to do without it being, this is what I have done, right? And so if you haven't had an opportunity in your previous job to do something that or like it's been unofficial, right? Like you've unofficially been mentoring junior staff, but it's not been a part of your job description necessarily. But it's just kind of an unofficial thing that you've been doing. Then by all means, write about it. I really enjoy doing this, and I think that just enthusiasm for something tells the reader that you're gung-ho about it, Yeah. And then if they want to dig into, well, are you qualified to do that? Like, tell me more about, your experience with that. Then have that conversation. But at least you represent it in your resume, that it's something that you're passionate about.
Well, if it's not there, they may never know to ask about it, right? And so I think that while trying to keep things brief and not be misrepresenting anything that you've done or your experiences, I think putting, again, your passions, the other things that you've done. And I think a lot of individuals in mining are great volunteers. And so many people volunteer at various associations. And I always say, like, look, list that, because it's a commonality. It's an area that we share. And if you're mentoring through Women in Mining, or you're doing something in terms of event setup and you love doing that for some other group, you all of a sudden have that as an experience, and you can absolutely put that in your resume in a way that's valuable or perhaps unexpected that somebody wants to ask about.
Right. Or if you love coaching and you don't necessarily have the experience for your professional life, but you've been coaching your kids' basketball team and it turns out you love that, then say it. I love to coach teams. And I learned that from this, or whatever it is. So, yeah.
And Chadwick asked a really good question too. So he had been advised to keep LinkedIn pretty focused and scannable, and not to include information that isn't pertinent to the roles that somebody's targeting. So what's your experience with being too verbose and having a meandering career path on LinkedIn? Laura.
Yeah. Hi, Chadwick. Thanks for that question. I think I saw that in your conversation with another guest that they had recommended using LinkedIn to have their entire professional history on their LinkedIn, that a resume should be focused and relevant, but that LinkedIn can have everything. And that goes to Chadwick's question, right? And I know that Chadwick's had an interesting career path, kind of in and out of mining. So I guess I would say, I guess put it all on LinkedIn. Keep it concise, though. You don't want every single detail, every single task, every single responsibility on your LinkedIn, right? Scannable is a good term. So, you're maybe expand on the things that are more relevant to the roles that you're pursuing, or towards the path that you have chosen that you really want to focus on, and just mention the other experiences. So that's a good way to kind of keep it concise, but also, representative of your entire career experience.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good tip. I like the consistency between a resume and LinkedIn, and I do reference both often. And when I submit candidates to clients, they often get both. If somebody has a LinkedIn, they get to see that if they haven't already looked themselves. But we sort of put the whole thing forward. But having extra detail or things that are not relevant, but it's a nice place. In lieu of a personal website, I think LinkedIn is a great spot to just sort of have more perhaps detail than you want to put on your resume in 2 or 3 pages. And Sam asked a really awesome question that I'm super excited to hear your perspective on, Laura. So he's seeing asking if the use of generative AI is becoming a functionally useful tool in resume writing or personal marketing, and can we identify it?
The answer is yes. We love it. And but as with anything AI, it needs to be fully reviewed for tone and accuracy, and just making sure that it's authentic to you. It's an absolutely great tool as well, to go back to our conversation earlier about editing down and summarizing. Sometimes that can be really hard for us to do when we're talking about our own experience. It's like, no, I want every single detail and every single thing I've done in there. Plop that into AI and ask it to summarize it for you. that could be a really good way to do that, to get kind of over that hump of, I don't know how to edit down. So yeah, we love AI.
I think that's a perfect suggestion. And I think AI is always about the prompts that you use, right? So learning how to prompt it, reviewing it, like not doing it in full, but doing it in chunks and saying, perhaps here is my resume or here is one portion of it. And I really want to focus on X. How do I lead this down so that it can present my best face forward for whatever it is the role that you're looking for? So I think that that's great. And also I have been really, really geeking out on trying all of the generative AI resume generators out there. So I have used like 5 or 6 of them, and some of them you have to pay for, which I'm really embarrassed to say, but I feel like this is market research for me. So I have and I get emails on a daily basis from 4 of them at least, and I'm very annoyed about it. They also come out with the absolute crap product as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I'm biased, but I think you got to talk about yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that I would recommend using AI to completely generate a resume, but it can certainly help writer's block.
Yeah. Or formatting. I mean, if you're really terrible at that, you might find a format and ask it to put it in it or whatever, and then talk about it more personally. So there are always pros and cons, but that all said, Peggy's chiming in. LinkedIn is a great place to differentiate yourself and showcase your accomplishments or thought leadership. I agree. And it's a powerful tool of developing your story and personal brand. Yes, it is. And I think that is sort of like what we want to hit home today. Your resume is exactly those things. And LinkedIn is sort of an extension of that. So if you need help with your resume, you know where to find Laura. And I'm so excited that we got to have the conversation. So we will end the stream at that. And we're happy to answer comments and things like that on LinkedIn. But thank you all so much for being here. And hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thanks for having me, Lindsey.
Thank you, Laura. Talk to you soon.
See ya.
Bye, all.